We'll give it about 10 seconds to actually go live. It tells us we're live a little bit before it's ready, and then we'll get started in a second.
And we're streaming over all platforms.
Yeah, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. I think that's it. Maybe LinkedIn.
Instagram.
I don't think so. I should know.
I just said that. I don't know either. And hi, Sheyda.
It's so good to see you
It's
again.
good to see all you guys. Caroline.
Yes, nice to see you as well. And
And on the phone, that's right.
you'll also be hearing screaming babies in my background. I just heard someone say the Wi-Fi's trash. So that's,
The benefits of living alone.
Oh.
Mine has my husband upstairs corralling, so I should be safe, but we'll see.
I may be saying my Wi-Fi's trash out loud, not a kid.
It's true.
Okay, so I can go ahead and get us started. Thank you to everyone watching online, as well as all of our panelists for coming to this month's community conversation. This month, we're talking about empowering change in Oklahoma's criminal justice reform landscape, which really, in layman's term, means how can you get activated? How can you volunteer? How can you be boots on the ground, especially as we are leading up to legislative session, in which A, we hear a lot of noise, but B, there's a lot of places for volunteers and advocates to step in or just to be educated. Both are great. So with that, I will introduce myself first. We'll go to our panelists. My name is Ashley Bender, and I'm the Interactive Marketing Manager for Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform. And I'll pass over to Carolyn first, so we can just kind of go around the screen for introductions.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm Caroline Cole, and I'm the statewide engagement manager for Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform. And I will pass it to Angela.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Angela Manson, and I serve as the Outreach and Legislative Director at the Oklahoma Policy Institute. And whoever's next.
I'll jump in. Hey, everyone. I'm Sheyda Brown. I'm Deputy Director at the Terence Crutcher Foundation. Excited to join you all tonight. Thanks for tuning in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Mukes. I'm an ambassador with Oklahoma for Criminal Justice Reform, and I'm also the employment specialist at OIC of Oklahoma County. Thanks for having me a part of the conversation.
Perfect. So I kind of gave a general overview, but I'm going to give a little bit more context before we get too deeply into it. I think it's important to highlight that throughout time, especially in Oklahoma, advocates truly have done incredible work themselves. While we often highlight legislative successes, we often talk about how much gets done kind of at the end of the day. We don't always talk about the people who got us there, the people who actually helped to make things happen. I think it's important to highlight that state questions like 780 and 781 would have never been possible without advocates. And generally, to set the tone, I'd like to say that polling shows, a poll by Arnold Venture as well as the Justice Action Network shows that Oklahomans, as they polled, are not tired of hearing about criminal justice reform. In fact, 79% of Oklahomans think we're not doing enough to actually invest in reducing incarceration and increasing our public safety. So if you're listening to this and thinking that it's just a webinar for you, that you want to get activated, a lot of Oklahomans are thinking the exact same thing as you. Only 5% of Oklahomans polled actually want to increase incarceration. Everybody else in Oklahoma is kind of on the same page, investing in community safety, investing in a public health approach to how we look at criminal legal reform. I want to set the stage that way so that we know. Additionally, we know in other states and other areas, everything from the civil rights era to contemporary movements for decarceration, depolicing, each of these chapters for each state and how these communities work have only been really possible because of activists, legal scholars, community leaders, and even just everyday state individuals, citizens, community members. So I want to start that and then pose the question to everyone of why is the volunteer role, the activist role, crucial in sustaining and amplifying the positive effects that we've already seen for criminal justice reform, or reform more generally? Why is the volunteer role so important? Anyone can start us off.
Well, maybe I'll start. And given the fact that I've probably got about, I don't know, 50 plus years experience, a lot to be learned over that time. I'm a firm believer that the power truly rests in the people. So I'm going to have to get that out there first, because that's the premise behind pretty much everything that I do when it comes to advocacy work and outreach and mobilization and creating movements. Because if we look at, and I'll just say this, and I'm wearing Angela's hat right now, the Oklahoma State Legislature reform and securing enough votes to create the kind of reform we want is really, really hard. It really is hard. And I always tell people, you can change the folks in the seat, or you can really bring to bear the power of the people on those folk who are in those seats. And that means, though, that we have to sustain that movement to have that kind of leverage that we need. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of times people don't realize that they do have the power. They don't know how to exercise that power. And there's this gap that exists between the belief that I have the power, the ability to utilize that power, and knowing where and how to do that. So as we talk more tonight, I hope we'll get a chance to talk I hope I get a chance to talk in a little more detail. But the only way, in my opinion, that we can have the impact that we need to, not just criminal justice reform, but any kind of social change movement, any kind of policy movement, is when people truly exercise that power. And more questions will address how I think we tap that.
I'll also,
Yeah,
sorry, go
piggyback
ahead.
on that. I'm sorry, Caroline. That's perfect pivot to exactly what I was thinking. For me, it's important because that's who it affects most. The boots on the ground. A lot of times I didn't realize I was an advocate doing the work in the community already. So for me, that's why it's important to go ahead and exercise your right to, as Ms. Angela was saying. It makes it a little bit more easier to start believing in the system and understanding the system. So and it most definitely opens up your eyes to why things certainly are the way they are. And that's the only way we're ever going to have any change and move us forward as a people is by people getting out and just doing that and advocating for their own rights. We are the ones who we know what's going on more than our politicians. They don't necessarily live in our communities. And if we're not a part of the conversation, then we'll never really be able to change what's going on individually in our community if we don't individually step up and let it know what we need.
And I think, Ryan, you really captured it perfectly. And that is, people who have been impacted are the experts, right? I mean, oftentimes we have a policy on paper, but we all know that that policy, when it's actually in practice, looks a lot different. And so I think when we have people who are willing to use their stories and their experience to create change, I mean, we have to center those voices. And I think really the other power that we have too, when lived experience advocates are willing to share their truth and what has happened to them and how it's impacted their lives, it humanizes this experience. So, some people who have the privilege of not having to have the criminal legal system in their lives, when they hear those stories and they see your humanness, it makes it real, right? It brings those experiences into their realm, into their reality, into their community, and hopefully will motivate them to also seek change as well.
So much that has been said, I would definitely echo. And, Angela, when you mentioned power, of course, that's the first thing that comes to my mind is organized people who are taking action together, really have the power to change things. And it makes me think about a story just a few years ago, when a lot of us were advocating around justice for Julius Jones. I think that was one of maybe a perfect example I can think of when it took a lot of volunteers taking a lot of different actions that led to that result. People did, various actions, anywhere from calling, a phone line that was calling powerful people in Oklahoma, writing a letter of support, calling the governor, showing up to a protest, showing up the day of when we were outside of that penitentiary, till the very last minute advocating. So I think, even people who were trying to make sure that those volunteers who went out the night before or were at the penitentiary had what we needed, whether it was like water or, whatever. There were just so many different actions that different people took to ensure that they were adding, their I don't know, expertise or value that they could bring to it in whatever capacity to move the change forward. So I just think it was beautiful to see even different cultural groups, even different religious groups, different racial groups all added a different element. I remember Indigenous organizers were adding the element of like ritual and even prayer on site, trying to, do their kind of customs and traditions to push things forward. There were just people doing all kinds of actions. So everybody had a role, and all of that collective work is what pushed the needle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that is the best part of the volunteer activist, or whatever your word you want to use, role, is that it's malleable and it fits every single Oklahoman. Mike and I always say we have a podcast called Oklahoma Odyssey, and all we ever say is the first step we can ask of people is to be educated. And even being educated is still stepping into a volunteer or activist role, because you're still engaging in the conversation. You're knocking off the ignorance, you're starting to step into the space. And even if for you, it's not showing up in a physical space, it still matters. So I love that you really captured how much being a volunteer can change for each human being. And it's important in Oklahoma that we have all facets of activists helping us, because everyone brings different strengths to the table for sure. Looking ahead to 2024, as I already kind of spilled the beans and everyone should know, legislative session is quickly approaching. Some that brings doom and gloom and some that brings a lot of hope, but what I want to center us in is not just our legislative session, but how can individuals begin to channel this passion, or even just this education? I learned about this and I'm activated. I want to know more. I want to, maybe sit in and listen more, or I want to actually show up, boots on the ground, and help push it one way or the other if you're for or against it. What specific opportunities do each of these organizations have? So that would be TOK as well as Terence Crutcher Foundation, for people to actually begin to get engaged. And then I can follow up with OCJR at the end.
I'll jump back in just because I was the last one to talk. I think that I would recommend everyone, follow a set of organizations through legislative session, because it's just so fast moving. And like you were saying, Ashley, like getting educated is the first step. And I always look to different organizations that are leading different advocacy issues to follow, to kind of keep in touch with what's happening, because it's changing frequently. And I look to them to really know when to take action and what action to take. I think that's the key, is again, this work has to be collective. Doing something on your own is great. If you want to contact your own representative about, something that you are really passionate about, that's always great to do. But I definitely think there is more of an impact that can be made when you're doing that in collective action with others. And you'll really only stay tuned into that if you are following social media pages, if you're signed up for those newsletters, those advocacy alerts. And so I definitely would recommend, Together Oklahoma, following the Terence Crutcher Foundation, other groups in our network like the ACLU, Oklahoma Appleseed. There are a lot of different groups in OCJR, Oklahoma's for Criminal Justice Reform. All of these groups tend to repost each other's work, tend to call people to action collectively. So if you care about this issue of criminal justice reform, that's definitely a starting place, I think.
And I totally concur with Sheyda. All of the organizations that Sheyda mentioned are actively engaged in tracking legislation, monitoring legislation. And I'll be honest with you, because I'm not that turf kind of person. There should be a whole lot of people to go around. And there's no way one organization, one group, one channel can reach and meet the needs. But the power truly is in the collective action. And you're absolutely right, Sheyda, when you talk about if we feel so inclined to contact your own legislator, definitely do that. But we want legislators to hear from multiple people. And in fact, there is, as a former state legislator, there's some value in hearing that same message over and over and over again. Now, I'm going to say, too, that as I spend time in the Capitol building now, some of those form emails and form letters, they'll carry weight when there are assistants in legislators' offices counting. But if you can take the time to pen your own personal message based on those kinds of messages or the wording that we want to get out, that really also does carry a lot of weight. But when there are action alerts to go out to you because there's a bill in committee or a bill on the floor, and that's when folk are going to be paying attention. I wish I could say legislators had long attention spans. They're kind of short. So, timing it is right. And it's really hard for the average person to track stuff because it moves so fast. So joining an organization, TOK, Together Oklahoma, through OK Policy, has what we call an affinity group, a criminal justice affinity group. And all of the organizations that were mentioned are there. It's a forum we've created for people to come talk about bills, legislation. We generally meet only once a month, but action alerts and other notices go out. And if we need to meet more frequently, we can. But if Terence Crutcher Foundation or OCJR is having a day of action at the Capitol, we also try to announce that. But let me quickly say this, and finally, to those of us who are in these organizations, that we really have to be responsible to make sure we work collectively together too. And sometimes that can be hard because you get into your own thing, and not that we're discounting, it's just that we're busy. So I'm just saying this to me more than anybody else. We need to redouble our efforts to make sure that our collective action, our collective work is organized and strategic in its approach as well.
Definitely. I think I completely agree with everyone you said to watch. I think Freedom Oklahoma is also an incredible group to watch if you're caring and interested in 2S LGBTQIA plus type bills, as well as ACLU, as Sheyda said, is tracking all abortion rights bills. This year, just for everyone to know, there is an increase in language and conversation around domestic violence, domestic abuse, and how it is written or how it should be written. And so you will see a lot in that space as well, including Appleseed has an incredible bill up that's definitely one to watch. That is a survivor bill that is set to help individuals whom are victims of domestic violence and are currently imprisoned due to, in some part, that. So I don't want to take the wind too much out of me and Mike's sails, but our policy council, Michael and I, have been working on a bill tracking list of every bill proximate to the criminal legal system. We've got close to 150 bills on there that we'll track and update every week. But if you're looking for a more individualized scope, our list is not for you. Our list is a little bit cumbersome. But what's good about our list and why we decided to just rip the Band-Aid off and do it is, even if you see that a bill never made it onto committee, it died, it's still really good for you to know what your legislators are putting up in your name. What your legislators are writing is super important, even if it's a lot of bills will fail. I think we had about 1,300 filed this year. I think about 120-ish will get passed. That's my prediction. We can all maybe make bets on that, but I think under 130 will even actually make it in front of the governor if passed at all. So it's good to, like we keep saying, stay informed. And I would also just give a word of the wise to not get too overwhelmed. You will see a lot of really motivating messages, lots of calls to action. And it might be a little overwhelming when you see, one from domestic violence group as well as one from a OK Repro group. It might be a lot. So maybe prioritize if you can. value your mental health. Really protect yourself as much as you can, but step in where you can as well. It's really important. And I'll leave a little bit of space if Caroline or Ryan has anything to add.
Ryan, did you have anything to add? I think you all just captured it perfectly. I mean, find a way to plug in, get engaged, bring the conversation home with you, bring the conversation back to your circles, your community. I mean, even if you maybe, don't have a complete analysis of what a certain bill may do, speak to it to your understanding. I mean, these are conversations we should be having at the dinner table. And so I think oftentimes we feel like the actions that we have to take as an advocate have to be big, or we have to be contacting elected officials. But I truly believe that some of the bigger change that we can make is just what we believe culturally as a community. And that really starts with conversation. So it's the little actions too. And then I'll pause and let Ryan speak if you would like to add anything.
I just want to add, as someone newly into this realm, don't underestimate yourself, and just remember that the average person's opinion means something. A lot of times coming into this conversations, I feel like what I'm going to say doesn't mean anything, but I have to remember that it takes a collective effort of people to make any change in this world. So I just want to remind the average person that may be listening that's never done this work to do not underestimate yourself and the knowledge you have, because it could take us all a long way collectively.
Definitely, I completely agree. I want to ask all of our advocates here, because each person here is an advocate in their own right and way. I want to talk about personal passion and how it serves. And we've talked about so far, it's a driving force for a lot of people. But I'd love for us as individuals to talk about our own personal passion, what got us into advocacy ourselves, how we have centered ourselves in this, and why we do what we do. I think it's going to give us all some boost in character as well, to know why we work for what we do, and how other people might be able to use what might seem like a mundane experience to actually fuel their passion and make their own personal passion as well.
Well, since I stopped, I'll start. For me, I'll just say this, as some of y'all may know, opening up the door about passion for me is a big thing, because I'm very passionate about just about everything I do in my life, because there's been some times where I've squandered time and didn't take advantage of the things that I knew I should have in the past. So I'm very passionate about everything that I do now. And with that being said, there's always been this underlying feeling, or something in me that I always knew that I was passionate about, and just seeing injustice in everything in my life, and I didn't know how it would come full circle, and being formerly incarcerated and having to go through the system myself. It all started to make sense on how easy it was for me to end up in these situations. Not to say that anyone made me make those choices to get me there, but it sure was easy to make those choices, as a lot of you would understand, listen to this, and have been doing this work. So for me, to make it out alive, to make it out still whole, intact, mentally, physically, emotionally intact, and still have all my wits about myself, and be able to pass the lesson along, to, if I can help anyone in any way not go through anything I've ever went through in my past, and make the system better for the ones coming up under me, so they're not as targeted as ones may have been in the past. I just had to, what I felt like, what kind of man would I be if I had this knowledge and I don't pass it along to the next person that may be going through these struggles? You know what I mean? Because luckily I was able to break the generational curses and cycle with my children, and they haven't been in the things that I've been in at their age, at their young age, and I'm breaking that cycle. But that doesn't mean everyone has it. There's not enough people, I can say, enough men that look like me that are willing to tell their shortcomings in order to better someone else. And I don't mind at all, because at the end of the day, it makes me a better person to be able to shine my light in every way, in any way that I can, instead of spreading darkness like I once did. So thank you.
That's so powerful, Ryan. And I think there's something to be said about that kind of transformation, right? And I'll share a little bit of my journey and experience. So when I was a teenager, I was sent to a lockdown secure facility, and I was there for 2.5 years. And when I got out, life was very difficult. And I went through all different kinds of struggles to kind of get back on the right track of going to school and kind of functioning in the world. And I eventually was able to have the opportunity to change laws that would have impacted my younger self. And that it actually makes me emotional every time I talk about it, but it being able to be a part of that change, all of a sudden my story meant something. The trauma I had been through was worth something other than just causing pain in my life. And so, learning what I had learned through that process, it became very apparent that this is what I need to do with my life with other people. If I can help be that bridge or be that liaison so people can use their stories for change, everyone deserves to have that level of healing. And so, that's why I'm here. My family also in other ways was impacted by the criminal legal system. And so I've seen firsthand how it can really just tear families apart. And so, anyways, I mean, it's once you, like Ryan said, once you kind of collect those skills and that knowledge, it's like, I have to share this. I can't sit on this and go work in accounting. That's just not what life had planned for me. So I'm happy to be here with you all and other folks who are just as passionate.
Wow, thanks for sharing, Ryan and Caroline. I think it's making me think of two things you all have already said, which is like Ryan, you just talked about how you're stepping into that role as advocate for the first time, but I think like your voice is really powerful, even maybe more so powerful than a lot of people who haven't experienced the system like me. I really don't have any personal connection to the criminal legal system, and so I think like people like you and even you, Caroline, people who have that experience leading the kind of narrative around this is so important, because what both of you said is what I feel like Oklahomans need to hear, which is that whatever happened in the past doesn't define who you are today, and you deserve second chances, or you just deserve to be seen in your full humanity. And I think that whole narrative piece of this movement is really important in Oklahoma. And what you said, Caroline, about talking to your family around the dinner table, like helping people know your stories so that people see that your story could have been my story and vice versa, and everyone, no matter what, deserves the baby screaming. I'm gonna come back around.
We didn't hear the baby screaming though, Sheyda.
You didn't?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Wow. It was a big one. But let me just finish with this. I just wanted to say that and at the Terence Crutcher Foundation, we've been working on narrative change and statewide narrative change. And we actually have, with a group of partners across the state, developed what's called a narrative North Star for Oklahoma. And both of your stories just reminded me of that. And what the North Star says is mistakes don't make us, care creates us, and the practice of liberation is our legacy. And I think that's like, the North Star I have in my mind is the idea that no matter where we come from, no matter what's happened in the past, really what defines us as Oklahomans is the care that we bring to each other and the future we're leaving behind for our children, so that they have a more safe and liberated future that isn't bound by all of the things you all just said, like the policies that could change to create that environment. Anyway, bringing it all back around to me, the reason I'm into this work is because my family is from Iran originally, but they told me this story of America, this narrative they had about America when they moved here, which was, if you come to America, you work hard, you'll make it. That was the narrative they told me. And growing up here, I saw how untrue that was, how it really isn't about hard work. It's about the color of your skin, religion, your zip code, the environment you're, whatever those external factors are, they really have more of an effect on your future than the choices you're making day to day. And I think I do this work because I want that to be true. I want it to be true that no matter who you are, no matter where you live, no matter what your past is or where you come from, you have a chance to thrive, be safe, succeed, and thrive in Oklahoma and our country. So that's always been my goal and why I came into this work and why I continue to do this work, because I have children and I want them and every other kid to have the ability to live in a safe environment and not have what happened to Terence Crutcher or to my own family post 9/11, where there was tons of racism and discrimination and unsafety in Oklahoma. I don't want any of our families to experience what's really rooted in white supremacy. And I think that's at the core of it, what we're fighting. And we all have a role in creating that future for Oklahoma. I hope that made sense, because there were kids screaming. So I hope it came across.
That made great sense. I'm sitting here listening to the three of you, and I think, thank you. Let me just say that from me to you, because as session starts, I start getting bombed out thinking this is just not going to be fun. And even though I've been an advocate since I was 14 years old, that's a whole lot of years. It still it's hard work. And so we need each other to motivate one another and share that passion. I started, like I said, when I was 14 years old, with a group of older African-American Oklahomans who really understood the struggle we were in. I grew up during the era, I was born during a time where there were Black only, colored only, and white only water fountains. And I can remember riding the bus with my grandmother downtown in the back, too little to understand why I was in the back. I just thought it was fun to be on the bus. But when I was 14 years old, having a chance to work with a group of folk who understand the importance of fair representation when there were no Black folk on the Oklahoma City Public Schools Board. That's how I got my start. But from there to college, and I was a probation parole officer as a kid, 21 years old. As a kid in Shawnee, Oklahoma, understanding how unfair rules were, to my work with NAACP here, to my work on healthcare, to all of these issues that I've worked on, but all still wrapped around what was going on in my community and in my family, and my brother, who's now deceased, but spent pretty much all of his adult life incarcerated. And so these personal experiences do drive us. They do create the passion that we need. And I want to say this quickly, though, for those of you who might be watching, like Sheyda says, well, I didn't have that kind of engagement in the criminal legal system. Hell, with as many people have been incarcerated in Oklahoma, if you're from here, it's probably a friend, a neighbor, a family member who's had that experience. But just in case you say, well, that's not me, there are experiences that we all have shared that demonstrates injustices and unfairness and inequalities that are there. We just got to tap them. And for those of us who are organizers who might be listening, build that relationship with folk. Listen to folk. Listen to the stories that they tell. Listen to where they are. Listen to them and develop that relationship and meet them where they are. Because that passion that we have to figure out how sometimes people, it's there and it's burning, but they don't see it. The light is not quite shining, but we got to begin to pull back those covers and really allow them to understand this is a driver, and we as a collective can use that driver and share that passion that continues to motivate us. So, I just want to speak to those of us who might be tired, hey, if we don't, then nobody will. Then who will? It's a life commitment. We are not going to be Dr. Martin Luther King. We're not going to be Mahatma Gandhi. May not be any of those, but in that space where we are, in that little space where we are, at our own kitchen tables with our family members, in our churches, our synagogues, wherever we are, in our neighborhood association meetings, just make sure we share our stories or we share our experiences that could inspire somebody else, but we listen to the experiences of others too and help them be inspired.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. For me personally, as you can see behind me, information is what I enjoy. I read books. That's how I began my journey as an advocate. Is I started reading and I studied a lot of history while I was in school. And I got this idea of what the criminal legal system used to be. And then I found Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform after I moved back after college. And my bubble was popped very quickly. That used to be was not the right word. It is what the criminal legal system is still today. And I know Mike's probably going to get like a tingle down his neck because I say this quote so many times. I say it on the podcast every chance I get. But it truly snapped my bubble of not understanding criminal legal reform to getting it. Is we have a new little advocate with us too. There's a quote from John Ehrlichman about the war on drugs, and it says, "You understand what I'm saying. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, then we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." And I always knew there was intentionality behind it, but to have someone so blatantly say it was like fully took my eyes wide open. And that's what did it for me. And that was learning about the past that brought me to now. I think there's a lot of value in, if you're interested now, read about now. If you're interested in how the criminal legal system is systemic, how it mimics Jim Crow laws, if the history is what's important to you, that's still an avenue to learn. That's how I got into this, and that's most of what our podcast is. Mike and I have done a lot of history episodes because it's so important, but it's also any way to get in front of people and get you talking is important, as we've all said. And just for clarity, the war on drugs is still happening, even though it's not happening to the same degree and we're not spending quite the money that we were before. We know that it was a failed policy. We know it was in bad faith, and it's still happening today. So that enough should be another kind of push for advocacy to see what we know is not working along many other things, but it's still happening to our community members. That was for me what pushed me over the edge, is seeing the intentionality, the history of it, and we're still stagnantly here. We've made great strides, but we're still in a lot of ways stagnantly here.
Ezra, I got to put this in because it doesn't fit in with both here. Still, intentionality is still underway on a whole lot of ways. Reduction of rights, whether it's the democratic participation, whether it's reproductive rights. I mean, these things don't just happen because somebody thought them up now immediately. I guarantee you guys, and I won't give the experience, but back in the mid 1990s, a conversation I had with some folk about restricting people's access to the ballot was a movement underway then. And it continues. These movements to rewrite history, to do all these things are very intentional because they have to do with who's going to be in power and who's going to control. That's a topic for another day. But I just wanted to say that because that should be enough to incite us all to act.
Now I have to chime in too, because I think your topic of history and what you just said, Angela, about people intentionally, creating this environment and these laws. I feel like right now in Oklahoma, just this war on, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, history, like even being somebody who is willing to teach your children the truth and like read books and expose your family, if the public school system can't, if you as a parent can and will, like that even is right now in Oklahoma, a revolutionary, a task or a way to be an advocate. My 4-year-old goes to a private childcare facility and he's coming home to talk to me about Rosa Parks and I'm just so thankful that he's in that environment and that we get to have those conversations. And I worry about him and both of them not having that ability in public school with these laws. So I think when we talk about the role of volunteer, when we talk about just what an individual can do, even teaching your family about history right now in Oklahoma is something you can do to help fight against these policies and these powers that are trying to keep the truth from being out there in the public.
You've set me perfectly up to tell Mike's quote that he says on every single podcast episode. If anyone can tell, Mike and I have a certain vibe we have on the podcast. His favorite quote is, "All history is a current event." And he says that that's something that he keeps us centered in OCJR and his own work and data, is keeping the fact that the past is not just rooted in the past, it carries over in so many ways. So I think that's a great thing to do, to put in there. And then just moving into the way that volunteer engagement has played a pivotal role in the positive evolution of Oklahoma's criminal legal system and what we can learn from our successes of the past. We've already talked about some. State Questions 780 and 781 are great examples. That was basically Oklahomans deciding that they wanted to treat addiction as a public health crisis. They no longer wanted to see their fellow community members incarcerated for something that should be treated with care and treatment. They didn't want them to be incarcerated. Additionally, so many Oklahomans know incarceration is 3 times the cost of treatment. There are so many reasons that Oklahomans decided they wanted to invest in public health, which is therefore investing in safety. Just so everyone knows, we reduced our prison population after all of those reforms by about 5,000 and closed 3 different facilities. So when we're looking at all of this kind of collective change, I'd love for anyone to talk about what impactful change they saw that was, again, community-led, community-run, and that can give people hope. It doesn't have to be as big as a state question. It could be smaller. It could be simply, that people are showing up to conversations and allowing more robust conversations. But whatever it is that people see as a win in their individualized spaces.
I'm probably gonna take this one from the Terence Crutcher Foundation, but the Julius Jones stay was huge for me. I personally knew Julius because I played basketball in the city. So for me, that was a huge win. Because I'm not a very negative person these days, but I just kind of took that as a L. The way the state of Oklahoma is, I just thought I was gonna lose another buddy that I grew up with, in the wrongest way. So for me, that was a huge win, and I appreciate so much all the coalitions that came together, and then the gossip thing. That's another. These things have been a certain way in Oklahoma for so long. So any little small, minute changes is huge. So for me, that restores some faith in my humanity a little bit.
I'll go ahead and jump in. So, I'm relatively new to OCJR and the CJR space in Oklahoma. And so I think, really my input is from being an observer of this movement. And I will say that, I think Oklahomans have been able to get the most done when they approach this issue with a sense of urgency. And, I think sometimes, especially when we're talking about, kind of like bigger systemic issues, it sometimes I feel like we can lack that sense of urgency around it because it's like, well, we want, these types of things will happen over time or in the next 5 years. We want to do, A, B, and C. But really, like the most effective outcomes that I've seen within the criminal justice reform space in our state is when people band together and they act with a sense of urgency, right? We have to do something now. And these policies are impacting real lives right now. And so maybe we don't know their names or we don't know the exact circumstances or their family or who it's affecting in their lives. It is, it's affecting someone right now, this very instant. So that would be my one encouragement, is to treat every issue with that same sense of urgency because there are lives behind it.
Some of our wins can be seen in things that we were able to defeat. Just like at the state capitol, at some really bad legislation, even though 780, 781 really are the law. I mean, it's constitutional change. These changes were made. There are still people at the state capitol who want to, roll time back. and disregard and do things differently. So we've been able to in the last couple of years, 2016 is when we passed. I think that for me, I think about, when we did 780, 781 just a few years ago, that was, almost 10 years ago. And we're still having to fight to keep those kinds of things. But the more we fight, the stronger we get. So those are wins. I think we should not discount. I have to talk about healthcare. State Question 802, the expanded Medicaid. Hell, we have been trying for years and years and years at the state capitol since President Obama and the Affordable Health Care Act was passed for us to expand Medicaid. We still have one of the highest uninsured populations in the state, in the country. I mean, it should have been a no-brainer. 90% federal dollars, but it was. And that effort to expand Medicaid in Oklahoma to single childless adults, to increase the income eligibility was a huge win, particularly for me, who've been an advocate for healthcare expansion since the early 80s, since before some of you were even born. All of you probably were born. So that was important. But I'm going to say this finally, too. There were some lessons learned in some of these losses, too. And I think we should count those as wins. It's kind of a weird way of seeing it. But when we try to expand, State Question 805 to say, this enhanced sentencing is bad, particularly for these little bitty crimes, you're going to send people to jail and prison for the rest of their lives. It didn't make sense. And we lost that one. So we have to, ping what some of the lessons were. I mean, people with less money beat us. They beat us because of how they framed the argument. They beat us because they were able to really get in front of people and say things that may not have been true, but they resonated with these audiences. So when we learn, those lessons learned about how you take influential players, put them out there, give them a message, routinely say it over and over and over that it's not true, but people believe it to be so ultimately, there are lessons to be learned. How do we counter that? I mean, we don't lie, but we know we have to get in front of folk too and have to use some of the tricks that they use to win those things. So I hate to end that on a bad note, but positive note, lessons learned that we will have to utilize.
I'll bring it back up, Angela. I got some wins that I definitely think about to keep us motivated and keep us moving. I think first of all, the Terence Crutcher Foundation, even existing 7 years after Terence was killed, and not just existing, but we own property now. We have a building. I don't know if everyone across the state has heard the news, but we were able to purchase a 65,000 square foot building in Tulsa where we really, it's a shopping center where it's one of the few properties in what was Black Wall Street, Greenwood, what borders what starts North Tulsa and borders downtown. It's one of the only descendant-owned, Black-owned, really just community-centered properties that isn't in the ownership of like the city of Tulsa or a white-owned property owner or like an out-of-state landlord. So that's ownership. So like that feels like it's 7 years later and we're stronger than we were even when this tragedy happened. And I feel like that gives our whole community hope. But in addition to that, I think, a few years ago, we were able to advocate for the cancellation of Live PD, which is just a predatory television show that, followed the police, and the city had a contract with them. And that was a success in 2020 that, Dr. Crutcher and the Terence Crutcher Foundation advocated for the cancellation of that. So the city, doesn't have this predatory, racist contract anymore. We have had other kind of similar to what you're saying, Angela, of like, honestly, unfulfilled promises. We've had promises for an Office of the Independent Monitor and different accountability measures for our police department in Tulsa that haven't come to fruition. But again, the fact that we're still standing and pushing that needle, and at the end of the day, the city is gonna have to answer to what is happening with our local police department. Like that's a win, that these things aren't just happening without any kind of public accountability. So I'll also just add that a huge win was the passage of $7 million of ARPA dollars that Our organization organized, about 60 other organizations to go to the city of Tulsa and say, we know these federal dollars are coming. They are supposed to go to communities most disproportionately impacted by COVID, which are Black and Brown communities. They're communities that are over-policed. They're communities most impacted by the criminal legal system. And we said, we want to see this funding that we know is coming from the federal government to go into these communities. And we were able to get a $7 million pot to go to community-based organizations impacting people who are experiencing, that the harsh realities of the criminal legal system. So I think that was a huge win because, again, the city had no plans of doing any public process. And it's just, again, having people paying attention to what is happening that is going to change the course of these policies, because they're going to have to answer the people. Because if the people are organized, there's power there, and they're going to have to answer. It can't just happen behind closed doors anymore. We're really shifting the way decisions are made locally. And we want to bring that. I mean, you all just talked about a bunch of different state policies, and we want to be a part of that and a leading voice in state changes just as much as local city and county changes. One last thing I'll say, we've been able to knock tens of thousands of doors in Tulsa. I think getting, hundreds of volunteers to go out on non-election years, hugely election cycles, to just go talk to neighbors and say what matters to you. And out of that, we've heard all kinds of infrastructure needs, lighting, mental health resources. Like, we've heard these stories, and even that's a win, is getting people out talking to their neighbors, not when it benefits them or a candidate, but really just benefits us as a community to learn about each other and build those relationships so that when it's time to go to the polls, like, we have, people engaged.
I've been door knocking with you guys a couple times, and I would strongly, strongly, strongly recommend everyone to do it. I think it makes you a better advocate just engaging in it, because you're becoming more educated yourself. You're getting out there. For me, even though, so obviously I'm public facing, I'm on this webinar, I'm on our podcast, it still was like a little scary to like actually talk about stuff with a real human being. And that was the best part. After you do that, you could do anything. After you go door to door, you are ready for any sort of advocacy that you get pushed into, for sure. But it was fulfilling as well, and it takes you out of yourself. It allows you to just sit and listen. So much, a lot of us think that advocacy is screaming into the void, but a lot of advocacy is just knowing when to be quiet and just listen to someone else. And sometimes that's the best thing that we can do for anyone, is just listen. If people are interested on more successes and kind of the general story of criminal legal reform since 2016 in Oklahoma, you can go to turningthepage.fwd.us. So that would be forward. They're an organization, a national organization that does incredible work in the criminal legal space. And they kind of showed our trajectory of where we were, where we are, and where we still need to go. And this is going to shock everyone. We did a podcast episode on it as well, an Oklahoma Odyssey that you can watch. Our most watched podcast with 7,000 streams itself, so it's got to be a decently good one. I'd go recommend it. But it helps to do what we're hoping to do today. Give you a little bit of hope, but also set a little bit of a fire under your butt. Kind of do a little bit of both. With that in mind, we will switch over. We'll start to wrap up kind of our questions. But our next question is, how can advocates effectively motivate and mobilize individuals to become volunteers? So we've talked about why we are and what you can do, but how can advocates basically foster that sense of collective responsibility and empowerment within the community? I think a lot of what we've talked about, in my opinion, is a little bit amorphous. So if we can talk about how the collective responsibility is important. My line that I usually give, which might set us up, and Mike and I talk about a lot, is, as we talked about, you might not have a touch point with the criminal legal system, but your taxpayer dollars do. While you might not have actually done something in the system, a lot still happens in your name. A lot of voting still goes on in your name as a taxpayer, as an Oklahoman. And so is ignorance, to a degree, still choosing a side? Just because you didn't know and just because you weren't touching it doesn't mean that you're off the hook completely, in my opinion. So how can we kind of help people to see or take ownership over that collective responsibility.
And I unmuted because this is, I think, the heart of what really we should not just talk about, but what we have to do. Because organizing, because that's what we're talking about, it really is hard work. Because people are taking care of babies every day and just trying to figure out how to pay the bills and just watching some crazy episode on Netflix or whatever people do, they do, and tend to disassociate to some extent between policy and advocacy work and community organizing and their lives. So we have to help them make that connection. And I think there are a couple of tangible things as organizers we have to do. First of all, we got to meet people where they are. So I can't come to you, knock on your door, and tell you why you ought to join the Oakland for Criminal Justice Reform or be a part of the Terence Crutcher Foundation or come to an affinity group meeting. And particularly if I don't have internet or if I don't know how to live stream or I don't know a lot of things. So meeting people where they are is important. And that takes a little time. It means building a relationship. It means listening to a person. And my folk that I work with, when I talk about the one-on-ones and taking some time and just having 10 more people or 2 more people or 5 more people show up at an event is important. But I said, would you rather them show up at an event or would you rather them when it's time to go to the Capitol or write a letter or send an email, do that? And it's like, So we have to figure out too, what people are willing to do. And instead of trying to make them fit into our campaign for mobilization, we got to really listen and figure out how whatever it is they want to do and can do or are willing to do, how we make that fit into what it's just kind of the opposite way, which as an organizer takes a little more time and energy. But the work is on us, not on the person we're trying to recruit. But I always say once we can get them in, once we meet them where they are, once we can appeal to their own self-interest, because everybody wants something out of this deal, and that's not bad. Don't think I'm saying it in a bad way because I'm not. We just figure out what that is and we can get them. Then it's each one build one. I go back to my old Black Baptist church roots, each one bring one. So you'd be surprised how quickly, if you can secure that nucleus of 5 or 10, how quickly that can grow to 20 and to 30 and then to 50 and to whatever. And you'd be surprised, but it all starts with that one-on-one relationship building, meeting people where they are, figuring out what their personal interests are and how to use where they are right now in the movement. And then we can teach, and then we can educate, and then we can do all those kinds of things that help them grow as an advocate, and they then bring others in. So I'll just stop there because I could preach about that for hours.
And I'm actually going to chime in on this too, because this is something that I really care about. And Angela, I really loved how you led with, we're all living really busy lives. I mean, I get it. I've got 3 kids. I work on a variety of different projects, including my full-time job. Like there is never a point in time, and this is something that I'm working on, that I'm not doing something like constructive, right? But when there's an issue that I really care about, I want to figure out how to fit it into my life. And so I think with a little intentionality, there's some ways to do this. And I'll share just a couple of the things that I've included in my day-to-day habits that have made it easier for me to engage with issues I care about. And one of them is, when I'm starting my day in the morning, I'm making my cup of coffee, I'm, cooking some eggs for the kids, I put on a podcast. I have them queued up. I've taken a little bit of time to kind of keyword search some podcasts that talk about the issues that I care about. And so I've just got the newest episode lined up. I play it while I'm doing things. I also, and this is probably because of my generation, but I love social media, right? I'm always on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook. And so one of the tools that I've used is setting notifications for accounts that talk about the things that I care about. And I've also gone through and unfollowed a lot of accounts that are maybe posting memes or other junk that's in my feed that's not really speaking to what I'm wanting to learn or what I'm wanting to carry forward in my life. So I just encourage you, take a little bit of time, kind of set up some protocol for yourself in your life, whether it's through social media, curate the information that you're taking in. So when you're scrolling, right, I think I heard someone the other day call it micro learning, right? So when you're scrolling, what are you actually ingesting? And with, I think, just a little more intentionality, you'll find how being an advocate and being an activist can fit into your busy life. And then the last thing I want to leave off on is go to in-person events. It feels scary at first. It can feel intimidating at first. If you are like me and you have social anxiety, and you think about all the millions of little steps that you're going to have to take to be able to make it to that event, I urge you to just feel that fear and do it anyways. Figure out the parking ahead of time if that makes you feel better, right? There's parking right here on this block, and then I'll be able to walk right into the event. And also know that a lot of people go to these kinds of events and they just sit in the back row and they're just quiet and they absorb, and there's no pressure for you to go there and perform or be the expert in the room. But I think starting to break down those walls and break down those barriers is so important. So just show up. You'll end up, loving it, and you'll want to go to the next one and the next one and the next one. And that's how it all kind of builds. I hope that was helpful.
It was. I would like to say, I know a lot of people that I come across and have these conversations with, and a lot of people in my community are already advocates. They just don't realize it. So once you get out and you start advocating, and you'll realize this is something really familiar to what we already been doing in our communities and our collective personal lives. And I also want to remind people that the narrative is going to be set whether you're a part of the conversation or not. So it's better to be a part of the conversation so you can start to set the narrative for yourself. Because no matter what, there's going to be powers at play that extract money from certain communities to take that money to keep those communities suppressed, if that makes sense. And y'all can keep up with what I'm saying on that. So if you don't get out to start to advocate, those things are just going to get worse, and they're not going to get any better for you and the people who look like you if you don't come be a part of the conversation. So I will end on this note. If it feels uncomfortable, you're never going to get growth or get anywhere sitting around being comfortable. You know what I mean? I've only gained and got stuff in this world by doing the stuff that makes me uncomfortable, embracing the uncomfortable things. But once I start embracing them, they become real comfortable and real familiar.
Y'all nailed it. I don't think I have anything to add to this question, but I really loved everyone's responses. You all made me think, honestly, of new ways, especially what you said, Ashley, about like all of us are impacted because it's our taxpayer dollars. Like I think even saying things like that to people, like helping make that connection, I think that would help get people more engaged. Like I'm still thinking about that reality, and I want to say that to a few people I know.
And I'm gonna tell you, I just appreciate you guys so much because there are a whole lot of people out there that are not engaged. And you can look at even from the basics of just going to vote. The majority of us who could vote still don't. And it just makes me crazy to think that that one little fundamental right and responsibility we have in a representative democracy that truly could change the outcome of a whole bunch of stuff, people are not willing to do. And I ask myself, why? What is it that they're missing? What's the link that they're missing? Is it that they hate government? Well, that's us. And if they do, whether you act or don't act, you're making a choice. Do they think they have no power? Which a lot of people do. But clearly, there is a connection between their day-to-day lives, taking care of those 3 babies, cooking those eggs, the price of eggs, the price of electricity, price of gas, taking care of those babies, the fact that we've not changed our child income tax credit or our sales tax relief credit. All those things matter to families' pocketbooks. But we as organizers, and I speak always to organizers, we have to figure it out. What is it that we can? I mean, a lot of people listen to podcasts, but they're already probably there and understand the link. What is it? Well, how can we get that person who just tuned out? And that's the hardest person to reach. It's like my campaign strategy. When I was a candidate, how did I get people to come help me? in a campaign. These were not people who were political at all. What is it that I could do? And I spent a hell of a lot of time just talking to folk one-on-one, making friends, being a friend, listening to something that they said that got them, that hook. So organizers out there, all of us who are organizers trying to get more and more people in with us, just take a minute and listen to folk and keep talking to them and keep making that connection. And before you know it, they'll be going with you. Caroline, they'll call you and say, hey, what meeting can I go to with you? Because you are their friend.
Exactly. That reminds me of a story. I don't know if he wants me to tell the story, but I'm going to. My brother had, they were away on vacation one time and someone broke into their home. And they had then their touch point with the criminal legal system. And as the process started, I don't mean to laugh, but this just reminds me of how far him and I have come in the candid conversations we're able to have. He came to me one day and he was like, have you ever heard of the Bail Project? And I was like, I have. We work quite closely with them. And he was like, they paid the bail for the guy, like we have him on video. And I was like, well, he's innocent at the moment. Has he been to trial? He can't stay there. Bail is another thing that you'll see a lot happening this legislative session. I mean, bail at its baseline is a two-tier justice system. If you have money, you get to go home. If you don't have money, you don't get to go home. We see a lot of bills that I would describe in our legislative session. It's a two-tier justice system. If you are white, you get one form of justice. If you're of color, you get a different. If you have money in some sense, some aspects, you get a different justice than someone else. Regardless, to say, him and I didn't agree in the beginning, but we were able to have conversations, and he took that moment. He was proximate to the situation, right? So it felt different to him. It was his home. It was his safety and his comfort that was changed. So to him, he wasn't ready to have that conversation with me. But eventually we were able to have that conversation. He was able to sit down and talk to me about it. And he has always been so supportive of my work and still is today. And we are able to agree on so much more in that aspect. But it also, I want to tell that story to show people that it's okay to have a really emotional reaction to some of the things that you find in the criminal legal system. Whether it's positive or negative, this is a really convoluted system that's got goods and bads. It's got things that might make you uncomfortable to read. And sitting with that uncomfortable feeling is also making you a much better advocate. There's a lot of times when I was learning to be an advocate that the silence was uncomfortable, but I knew that I needed to sit in the silence and learn. I knew I needed to know the full story of what happened before I made a decision. I think especially going to legislative session, it's good for you to get the whole story. Even if that takes 5 different articles you're reading or 5 different groups you're looking to, it's best to get the full story before you kind of jump in and make your decision, because as Angela said earlier, there are tactics that work to appeal to your emotions, to get you riled up and angry. And the best thing you can do as an advocate sometimes is just sit in silence and listen to the full story of what's going on. I say that thinking that we're going to be having, I know for sure, oh, excuse me. So we're going to have a bill this session that is talking about voting. There is a bill that's going to clarify who can and can't vote. As of now, how it is, formerly incarcerated people who are let out before their sentence is over don't actually know in some situations whether or not they're able to vote because of the way that the law is currently written. It's extremely confusing. So that will be changed. So another thing, to hop on what Angela said, if you're sitting here thinking, I can't vote anyways, I can't participate in this democracy anyways, well, one, that's probably not true, but two, we are actively always working to get the full engagement of the community when we're working for a more equal system for all. We really do mean that. We mean every single person should be able to actively participate in the system in whatever way, whether they agree with us or not. You should still be allowed to participate in the system. I think that's important to know. As we have about 20 minutes left, might be a little generous, but I'm going to allow closing thoughts for everyone. You don't have to rush through, maybe 5-ish minutes for each person. Anything we didn't hit on that you want people to know to set them up for success for legislative session or just the year, making it through. We've got a long year ahead of us. Making it through the whole rest of the year as an advocate can be a tall order. So anything anyone wants to share with?
I just want to say something real simple and sweet. Caroline's already heard me say this a couple of days ago, but sometimes I look at the system and I'm like, does it work anywhere? Does it help? And after being drugged through the system, which I like to say, and still dealing with the repercussions of it, I can actually say this advocacy work. It works. The advocacy works. It really does. And if you want to find an example, look at me. I'm not saying I'm a great example, but I do know without having great advocates in my life to help me better myself, elevate myself, and to show me and have grace to prove to myself that it's possible, then I'm afraid to even begin to think where I may be. So that's something that may help everyone on this phone call. Like it can be done. And I'm not saying this is the end all be all where I want to be, but I know guaranteed due to the advocacy work that has been given to me and all the uplifting that people have done through advocacy work, surely has propelled me into something that I feel will be great in the future. So it does work. I hear people talk about all the time moving needles, and a lot of times it feels like when you do the advocacy work, you're moving the needle. But if you keep moving the needle enough, you'll make big leaps and bounds. And it's still hard to see at times, but I guarantee it works. It really does. So let's be a part of the conversation continuously. And for those who haven't, come on and let's join the fight. We're here. We're going to help you and we're going to support you.
I'll just jump in with just a few closing comments for sure. I don't want people to ever think that they don't have the ability to make changes happen, because we all, to quote a very famous American, can be the change that we see. But it doesn't happen overnight. And I want I want us always to celebrate our wins. I was glad somebody was talking about some little things about just changing the process. Hell, we've been hollering and screaming about transparency in the state budget forever and a day since OK policy was around. Finally, the Senate did something that really wasn't new in terms of their public meetings on state agency budgets. Well, hell, I went into the legislature as a staffer in 1981, and we were doing that then. But at least they put it out there and says, we're going to hold these meetings. Hell, we tried to celebrate that. So any small victory is a victory because they build on each other. So I want people never to feel defeated, because that's what they want. That's part of their strategy, to make you think you don't have any power. My favorite quote, Ashley, is Carter G. Woodson quote from way long time ago. If you can control a man's thinking, then you can control a man's action. And the quote goes on to talk about if there was no, I said Carter G. Woodson, I'd make sure, because it may have been one of my favorite, Frederick Douglass' favorite quotes. But bottom line, it's still the quote. And if you could control a man's thinking, you can control a man's actions. And he was talking about that in terms of Black people. And the quote goes on to talk about, I'm paraphrasing now, about sending back Black folk to a back door. But if you have controlled their thought process so intrinsically, even when there isn't a back door, they'll build one, because that's all they know. So there is an effort underfoot in this country and in Oklahoma to control what we think and what we know. Sheyda, you talked about your kid, your four-year-old coming home talking about Rosa Parks. I was reading with my 8-year-old granddaughter, and one of the reading requirements was Little House on the Prairie. And there was a comment in there when they were settling in the prairie that they were settling and had to be very careful because of all of these red-faced savages. Now, that was my part to read. I did not read that aloud. I just kind of skipped over some of that, and I went to her mom. I said, these are card-carrying Native tribal members, my granddaughter is. I said, you got to say something to her school about this. There is a move underfoot to teach our babies stuff that is not true. You know, they talk about the left doing indoctrination. I mean, there's a hard move underfoot for the right, the far right, not so far right, to indoctrinate our kids to believe what is not so. Most of you saw the social media posts and the debate about posting the 10 Commandments in the classroom. And the best debate was by an individual who identified as a Christian as to why that was wrong. So I just want us to realize that if we don't fight now, if we don't fight the battle now, we may not have an opportunity to fight it in the future. And I don't mean to scare anybody, but I do intend to incite a riot of sorts, a movement. Some people will call that a riot, you see, the movement to fight back on this stuff in the criminal legal system, which is better. But I guarantee you guys, if we don't fight, there are those who will move it back to where it was. In the healthcare system, there are those who would move this access we're generating to reduce that access and to reduce a right to choose and a family's right to make decisions about the healthcare of their children. So I just want us to be inspired. And to the advocates on this call and the organizers who are listening to this webinar, double our efforts, pick up the gauntlet. If what you're doing is not working, don't say it's not working, just do something different. You know, quit trying to do the same stuff and expecting a different result. We know that's insanity. It's idiocy. It doesn't work. So we have to do things differently as advocates. We understand if those of us who have been given this responsibility to he who's given much, much is required. I mean, it is required on us. And so you might take a break, that's okay, but then come back. And at 68, almost 69 years old, my mission in life is to find some more folk to replace me. And I think we all ought to keep trying to bring people into the fold, bring them in, and be inspired. Because if we stop, then what is assured? If we stop, nothing will. No, things will change. They just won't change for the betterment of humankind. And we can do this, and we can do this.
Angela, I appreciate you trying to not scare people, but honestly, I am scared, and I want people to be scared, because to me, it's just when it's to the point that, you know, we can't even teach the truth or talk about it in our school. Like, I am scared for what that means for our kids and the future of this state. So, you know, and I think that's what makes this movement hard. Like you said, there are people, they're out organizing us. We, you know, in Tulsa, in the 2020 protests, you know, we shut down the highway, and then in next legislative session, there was a bill that says you can run over protesters and not get in trouble, and you won't be held accountable. And so when we push the needle, it's like the goalpost moves, and they are out organizing us. So it is scary, and it is urgent. It is, you know, I feel like it's just like red siren alarms are going off, because especially this year nationally, I mean, it's our actions are going to count, and our inaction is going to count. And I think I do want to push people to just take whatever action we can this year, during this legislative session and this election in the fall, because I know people always say, oh, there's never been a more important election, but it feels like that is true more and more as some of these laws get passed, especially in Oklahoma. So I want to double down on all of that and say, I even have a date in mind that I can put out there for you to hold your calendars, that we are going to be a part of a teach-in March 9th in Oklahoma City, focused on voter mobilization and voter engagement. So there isn't anything publicly out there yet, but like, just know that, all of us behind the scenes are already, working on dates. We're going to have a calendar full of activities for people to get engaged. So definitely save the date. Like I said earlier, I want people to follow us on social, all of our different organizations, sign up for newsletters, because we will be sending action alerts out. And even if you can't vote yourself, like, I know that's a reality, especially in the communities we're trying to serve, that people can't even go out and vote. But what you can do is activate other voters. We have such low voter turnout in our state that it is about getting new people registered, but it's also just about getting people who are already registered to go to the polls, because we have some of the lowest numbers in the state, in the nation. And I just want to add, on the topic of criminal legal, reform, when I'm thinking about other statistics, I know things have somewhat improved, but we also, I think recently, we were ranked one of the deadliest one of the states with the deadliest police force. Like, police encounters are dangerous and can be deadly in Oklahoma. And we just ranked to the top for so many other things that I could name. So we still have a long ways to go. And I do want to celebrate our successes, but I feel like it's just so urgent, especially with the fact that our kids are in the dire situation they're in. And what did it take for education, for the needle to move for education? It took the teacher protests that were like 50,000 plus people at the state capitol. And so it just shows you need numbers. We need numbers, and people who are out organizing us, they have numbers, they have people, and they have money. And so we have to increase our numbers to move to really fight the people who are out organizing us on some of these issues. So I don't think that was the most clear and concise, but I guess all I want to say is it is dire, and we need everyone to come alongside us in this fight and do what you can, whatever action feels right for you, whether it's sharing something, showing up, voting, like whatever action feels right. We really need everyone alongside with us on this. It's dire for our kids.
Definitely. I echo everything everyone has said. And just as me, as a human being, not a representative of OCJR, I was having a conversation recently with my mom about banned books. And again, as you can see, why that would be horrific to me to see some of the things that they have banned. But almost every book was a part of my curriculum in school that I read. And it might get loud in a second. We have a police car coming by. Speaking of them, they heard you. And that is another way where you can begin to dig in. You can begin to ask the why question. Getting educated, even in topics such as that, is still important. Why are they banning this book? What does that mean to my child's education? How does that change from the difference in the education that I was getting, 10 years ago versus the education a child is getting now? What losses can we see there? Or if there is any value add, what is that value add? You can really begin to dig into these issues a lot deeper than I think we are. I think sometimes people who are appalled by things, like I personally am appalled by the books that are being banned, but how deep am I going to find out their rhetoric, to find out how they're doing it, to find out how I can be a part of that conversation in a way that's going to actually impact the people who are going against me? I can't just say I don't agree with you. Okay, they don't care. Right. And it's important that we think about language. When we're looking at this legislative session, the bill tracking that I was talking about earlier, just to kind of give an overview, it has a lot on what we call crimes and punishment. That category is going to be an increase in either length of time or fine associated with crimes. These are crimes that are already categorized as either a misdemeanor or a felony in Oklahoma, and then if that's being changed. Additionally, there's sentencing reform, housing. There is a police category. There's a couple bills up right now for things like CLEAT and increase in pay, some things just to watch as well. Reentry, expungement, and probation and supervision are all on there as well. Those kind of tie into each other really well. as at least a good nod, we had great successes with supervision last legislative session, and we're hoping to continue that fantastic momentum and really shore up some of this. Additionally, Clean Slate initiative and the Clean Slate legislation that passed, that was such a huge win. In this legislative session, we want to seal the deal. We want to get the legs behind Clean Slate. We want to be able to actually help the people that Clean Slate is supposed to help. And we can't do that without pushing a few tiny things over that threshold. That's something to watch for this legislative session. And then there is additionally, as I said, a lot around domestic violence and domestic abuse, and a lot in the juvenile space. I would say the juvenile space takes the biggest mental fortitude, I would say, to be able to parse out what they're saying and why. What is the why behind why this is happening? Is there a why, or is it just to pass a bill that you know will pass because of the way the rhetoric was framed? I'm sure a lot of people will be able to get what I am winking there to you. And then the final kind of area additionally is going to be the abortion category. For a lot of these kind of more, so we're gonna call them spicy topics, I would really strongly encourage you to follow our partners. Go follow Freedom Oklahoma, go follow Oklahoma Appleseed. Oklahoma Appleseed has an event coming up as well for their survivor bill. Go to that, get educated with the people who know best. And then, at least in this case, you can look at, oh, there's a bill on voting rights. Oh, there's a bill on housing. And then take your next step and keep going down that road. I think that is most of my closing thoughts. This sheet will go up next week. The first day of session is rapidly approaching, so we hope to get it in front of everyone right before session starts. It'll be updated every single Friday to tell people where a bill is, if it's dead, if it's alive, where it's going, and we'll try to keep everyone up to date as much as possible in as much of a nonpartisan view as we can. We aren't trying to educate on what OCGRI thinks in these moments. We're just trying to tell you what's being passed or what's being spoken of, because it's really important. With all of that in mind, I will end us just a few minutes early. Thank you so much to our panelists for being here. Thank you for your advocacy, each of you, both collectively in your groups, but also just individually as advocates. Thank you for sharing your stories, being vulnerable, and helping to mix exactly what I said, a little bit of hope, a little bit of fire under everyone's butt, because it's time for everyone to really invest in change in Oklahoma and really invest in public safety in a way that makes sense, that's fiscally responsible, that's rooted in data. It's time for us to actually make that change. So thank you so much to everyone, and I hope everyone else, I will link to everybody's socials, anything we've talked about links wise, put it all in the chat for everything, but we hope that you can watch our other podcasts, follow us, all of those things, webinars. And thank you so much.
And Ashley, you, Ryan, and I must get babies next time.
I know, I should have got mine.
You should have. I don't have one, so 28 years old, too big to hold. Thank you, guys.
I'm not
Thank
sitting
you.
my
Thank you.
10-year-old on my lap. He too big, you know. That's
So
my
thank
only
you.
baby.
That's
wanna say
right.
thank
Thank
you,
you, Ashley, for
everyone.
coordinating this. This is a great
Yes.
opportunity. Thank you all. Good to see everybody.
You all.
Bye.